So, quiet quitting. Have I got you intrigued there? Good, I hope so. It refers to when an employee does the bare minimum when it comes to their work responsibilities, which of course, as you know, can have a potentially negative effect in the workplace. Reasons for quiet quitting are said to range from being overworked to pure laziness. And according to employment law experts at Cliffe Dekker Hofmeyr, it can have a negative impact on one's long-term career aspirations. They do, however, caution employers to also be aware of the signs of bad management, which could easily be the cause of an employee shutting down, saying that sometimes quiet quitting is less about an employee's willingness to work harder and more about a manager's ability to manage employee workload. Interesting perspective, isn't it? Fezeka Mbatha is an associate in employment law practice at Cliffe Dekker Hofmeyr. She joins us for this conversation. Fezeka, good to have you. Thanks so much for being with us here on the program.
Thank you for having me, Leanne.
Okay, so I think I've done an okay job of explaining what quiet quitting is. Do you want to add anything to it? I mean, a definition of quiet quitting, what it actually is all about.
So I think you did explain it quite well, essentially. That's what employees are doing, quietly quitting. And essentially it means employees walking into the workplace at 8 and being ready to pack up at 4:59 to be on the way out at 5. Essentially doing the bare minimum, nothing more than that. And the reasons for that vary. So it could, as you've already alluded to, could be because of being overworked and underpaid and undervalued. So there are many reasons for it, but essentially that's what it means. It's just I'm not going above and beyond what's expected of me.
Yeah. So, and I mean, that happens so often because, you know, you feel like you keep on going over and above the call of duty. And yet, you know, when it comes to getting the reciprocal on the other side from your employer, you get nothing back. So you actually eventually get beaten down to the point where that's fine. I'm just going to come in and do what I have to do and walk out the building as soon as I possibly can, no more and no less. So could we say that's kind of down to bad management more than anything else?
I think that's mainly the reason. So we have those outliers where we have employees that are simply lazy. But with the surveys that we've been looking at, it's mostly due to bad management. People are willing to work hard. People are willing to go up the ranks. But the question becomes, if I'm going above and beyond, but I'm not getting rewarded for it, I'm not getting recognized for it, then what is the reason for doing it? So I think that's essentially it. If employees come into the workplace and they are being rewarded and are being valued, they do not mind working and burning the midnight or every now and again to get a task done. But if nothing shows after that, and I think employers sometimes make a mistake of thinking pizza once every month will solve the problem. It's much more systemic than that.
Let's sort of analyze quiet quitting, though, because I know, I mean, let's just take the time of COVID. So this was a tough time for everybody, and those that did sort of go online, you were expected to be available all hours of the day. You know, my husband works in a corporate environment, and he would burn the midnight candle. I mean, I would see him coming down from the office at all hours, up early in the morning, whenever there was a beep on the phone, upstairs to work on the computer, never drawing a line in the sand and constantly working. And I think that was a lot of people going through the same thing, and your bosses expected you to go over and above the call of duty, kind of putting it to you, saying, you should be lucky you've got a job. There's so many people who don't have a job. You need to do so much more. And this, of course, would lead to fatigue and breakout, and then people saying, I can't do this anymore. Is this also perhaps a reason behind this?
100%. So you see, with COVID, we saw the Great Resignation happening as well. We see employees saying, I want a more balanced life. I want to have a work-life balance to be able to spend time with my family. And this life of always working is just not sustainable for me any longer. And I think that is the reason. It's essentially goes to the point where employers would have to strike a balance to say, we appreciate you working hard. Here's time off every now and again. Because I think in the long run, fatigue does is a factor, and employers need to take that into account to show that they care about employees' health and well-being. And I think once that's sorted out, every now and again, when there's a huge task that needs to be done, employees do not mind rolling up their sleeves and getting the work done. But I think there needs to be more focus on mental health and work-life balance. And you'll see with how employers deal with that, you'll see an increase in productivity, because human beings, especially if you are going to be rewarded, do not mind working hard.
I'm quite fascinated by how this little trend of quiet quitting came about. And maybe you can tell me, but I know that from what I'm reading, it emanated from a TikTok video, if all things in the world. So I'm going to try and send it to my producer and see if maybe we can play it. But so this big bang, according to something I'm reading, is from a TikTok video. It was uploaded by a 20-something engineer. His name was Zaid Khan. And he had all these shots of New York flashing and just a whole bunch of things. And he had this voiceover, 17 seconds of a video that has caused this effect. And he basically said, I recently learned about this term called quiet quitting, where you're not outright quitting your job, but you're quitting the idea of going above and beyond. You're still performing your duties, but you're no longer subscribing to the hustle culture mentality that work has to be your life. The reality is it's not, and your worth as a person is not defined by your labor. Are these words the feelings of the youth of today?
I think since you're mentioning TikTok, certainly it is the youth that's pushing this narrative, saying, I need a much more balanced life as a human being. This hustle culture is just not sustainable for me. And I've seen from that particular TikTok videos, others jumping on the trend and saying that they are also quietly quitting. And obviously there are ramifications for that, especially if you are someone who wants to go up in the ranks, and being seen as someone who's disassociated from the workplace, who essentially works an 8 to 5, don't call me after hours, I won't reply to emails after hours, even if they are urgent, makes it look like you're not a team player. So there is that tension of saying, I want to be a successful engineer, a successful accountant, but I do not want this hustle culture. But then if you are not willing to work with your teammates to get a task done, then it makes you not someone who the company sees as growing with the company. So the youth definitely is looking to have this quiet quitting be a trend and something that brings discussion forward about how work-life balance should be, but there is that risk that's associated with it.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's talk about the law and this whole trend of employees quitting quietly. I mean, I don't suppose you're doing anything against the law. I mean, I know that there are countries that have actually put a law into effect, and I think I'm not sure if it's New Zealand or Australia, that say during work hours, yes, sure, put in everything, but after work hours, you're not even allowed to send an email after a certain hour in the night. I mean, there are certain countries that have put a law into position like this, but is it lawful for employees to so-called quit quietly?
Technically, it is not illegal. So if you report at your job from 8 to 5, and that's what's expected from you, and you do that, that's fine. But the issue becomes with how you, during that period, how effective you are. So if you're not performing to the required standard, and also depends on the particular level you're at in the workplace. So you'll see some people are expected to go above and beyond, especially, let's say you are senior management in a company. You coming in at 8 and leaving at 5 does affect possibly your KPIs and your performance. And what results in that, if you are not performing as an employee, the employer has recourse to try and performance manage you. And that does have risk for that particular employee in the long run, in terms of being employable, being someone that the employer wants to somehow grow in the company. So it's not technically illegal, But if you are not meeting the required standard of someone in a particular position, then it becomes a problem, and the employer can come in and attempt to discipline or performance manage you.
There's quite a fascinating thing as well, and it's a movement in Japan. And this Japan is called, it's called this movement Shokunin. I may be pronouncing it wrong, I probably am. And it's quite interesting to see what it's all about. And then when I read what this is about, and I think of how my parents, their culture of work. So what this Shokunin is always doing is it's also a form of quiet quitting, where it basically says that an employee it's about setting boundaries and simply completing the tasks that you're supposed to complete within the time that you're paid to do them, with no extra frills. No more kowtowing to your boss or customers. No more working nights and weekends, incessantly checking your email. It's basically about divorcing your ego from what you do for a living and not striving for perfection. So fascinating to see that this is a movement that is actually happening.
Quite fascinating indeed. I didn't know about that, but
No.
it actually describes what quiet quitting is. It's essentially that I'm doing what I am required to do, but I'm not going to go above that, is essentially what quiet quitting is. And I think that's similar to the Shokin movement.
Well, we've learned something, we really have, and I imagine the economics of quiet quitting is not so great, or is it? Is there an effect on economics and the turnout in the company?
I think there is. So essentially, with low productivity means low efficiency, and it means it does affect the employer or the company's profitability. Because, for example, if you have a situation where ordinarily you pay your employees all the time, if there's a breakdown in the plant, now it means if your employees are not contactable after hours and they're not, or they give an excuse to say I'm not available, it means you have to try and outsource them. If there's a breakdown in a plant, there's a breakdown in a plant, and that's additional expenses for the company. In addition to simply paying more to get outside or outsource workers, there is this thing of also efficiency. So employees are no longer doing as much as they ordinarily, or producing as much as they ordinarily would if they didn't have, or they weren't quite quitting. So it does have an effect on profitability.
Doing the job of 10 people and you're just one. Let's leave it there, Fezeka. Thanks so much for talking to us about quiet quitting, a worrying trend in the workplace. Fezeka Mbatha from Cliffe Dekker Hofmeyr.